I want to make a quick video on a CP that to me has a very interesting place in this game. By the title of the video, you probably figured out that I'm talking about the Bracing Anchor CP in the Fitness CP skill tree. This CP may actually be too strong for its own good. The reason I say that is block mitigation is an extremely powerful tool. However, since it's so strong, it has a negative, and its negative can be annoying at best and just bad at worst. Bracing Anchor while in combat grants 20% block mitigation, and you are snared by 16% at all times. The base value of Bracing Anchor being 20% means that any fight that has a lot of blockable damage, Bracing Anchor should be one of the best CPs you can use in this fight. However, there are times where this just isn't true. I want to start off with the good of Bracing Anchor. Bracing Anchor in a few fights is basically mandatory to help mitigate a lot of the damage coming out. In fights like Fallgraven hard mode and Talaria hard mode, you'll have a lot of incoming blockable damage. Starting off with Talaria, however, she is the weirder of the two, as most of her damage comes from a dot. Even though dots are unblockable, her light attacks do enough damage to make them threatening and put you within the range of this dot to die. Blocking these light attacks is a very good way to mitigate this, and Bracing Anchor isn't really that bad as the movement requirements in this fight aren't that high except for Winter Storm. During Winter Storm, you still can outrun the storm even with Bracing Anchor. However, Bracing Anchor in this fight, I will admit, does make this phase slightly more annoying, though the extra survivability makes this fight a lot easier. Moving on to the second fight in this is Fallgraven hard mode. Fallgraven hard mode is an interesting case as he does 99% of his damage with his light attack. His light attack hits very fast and very hard. While this fight is an interesting case because you don't need Bracing Anchor, as you can just survive this fight without it, it makes it harder for really no reason. Fallgraven's light attack does a lot of damage on block. This is a very early log from when I started doing trifectas, so this build is probably terrible. I haven't looked too much into it, but this is a lot of damage on block. On first floor and final floor, Fallgraven basically never stops swinging. On the second floor, he does have some reprieve time as he has to do a bunch of mechanics. However, during the first and last floor, you'll basically never have an instance where he's not just hitting you in the face. These two bosses have something in common, a very overtuned light attack. Talaria, we use Bracing Anchor to mitigate her light attacks because the dot does so much damage, and for Fallgraven, we use Bracing Anchor because his light attack is his main source of damage and he does it constantly over the course of the fight. While these are good examples of when Bracing Anchor is useful, I want to talk about the two different reasons I don't use Bracing Anchor much anymore in daily use. In 99% of content in ESO, Bracing Anchor is just completely overkill. 30% block mitigation is a lot, and almost all overworld content and most dungeon fights don't do anywhere near enough blockable damage to warrant using this CP. Bracing Anchor is a great CP. It is not great when you don't need it. 30% block mitigation, while insane on paper, when you take 10 damage, taking 3 less isn't the best thing in the world. Okay, actually though, that might be an over-exaggeration a little bit, but you get what I mean. I want to talk about why in trials I don't use Bracing Anchor much anymore. For a fight that Bracing Anchor is just not really that useful for is a fight like Zelvaka hard mode. I'll explain why, as it might be a little weird to hear that Zelvaka, a boss that basically only does direct blockable damage, is a bad fight for Bracing Anchor. Zelvaka does a lot of her damage to the main tank with her heavy attack. It is a 5-swing channeled heavy attack, and you have to block either all of the hits or dodge roll most of them, blocking the 2 easy ones in the middle. Starting off, we can just dodge roll the first, block the 2 and 3, dodge roll 4, and dodge roll 5. If we do that, we'll take basically no damage from this attack. However, there's an even easier way to avoid this mechanic. If we want to block the entirety of the heavy attack, we can just use a skill like Immovable. Zelvaka's heavy attack happens to last 5.5 to 6 seconds. Immovable also happens to last for 6 seconds. Immovable is basically Bracing Anchor in a skill. However, the major difference is the buff is far stronger and the debuff is also far stronger. Instead of being snared by 16%, Immovable will drop your movement speed to basically nothing. Like the debuff, the buff will also gain increased power. You will almost always end up at the block mitigation cap. If not, you can use a CP like On Guard to help mitigate this even farther. Along with this, there are some CPs like Juggernaut, though 5% mitigation when your block mitigation is this high doesn't really do anything. The reason though I would choose immovable over bracing anchor is the 16% snare on bracing anchor, while a little bit better than the basically 90% snare immovable applies, is you have to run up the stairs, and bracing anchor has a 16% snare the entire fight, whereas immovable only has it for the duration of her heavy attack. Fights like this where there's just a sudden burst of very heavy damage coming out can make bracing anchor not a great option, as you don't need to block the entire fight. Think of fights like Roxa hard mode and Archdruid Devrick hard mode from Earthenroot Enclave. Like Zelvaka with her heavy attack, Earthenroot Enclave's Archdruid Devrick boss does a lot of damage during his breath, and this is about the only time he's threatening towards the main tank. One thing I'd like to add is you can get through Zelvaka using bracing anchor, and there's nothing wrong with this. It's just not the way I prefer to tank it, and I just wanted to make an explanation of why I think immovable is the better option. The last reason I don't really use bracing anchor much anymore is the way the game is going design-wise. ZOS is implementing a lot of heavy damage dots that you just really can't do anything about while blocking. Looking at recent fights, though, one of these I guess really wouldn't be considered recent, but we have Bosse and Ysela. These fights have extremely powerful dots where blockable damage isn't really the main threat. As these fights become more and more prominent, we need bracing anchor less and less, as direct damage is becoming less and less threatening, while there's just more and more heavy damage towards dots. One other thing that's also been doing to punish people with extremely high block mitigation is adding the hinder debuff to most heavy attacks in the game. This applies in some instances a massive heal absorb that you have to out heal before you can heal any of your actual HP. This brings me to the last thing I want to talk about with bracing anchor. It is a very, very good learning tool. Going into fights you don't know, bracing anchor can help you understand the damage output and when certain things happen, as you'll have a safety net when blocking. Learning some fights in ESO can be an interesting challenge, as most of the time as a tank, you're learning while also getting actively killed the entire time. So having this safety net is extremely helpful when you're just out there learning new fights. But that's about it. I just wanted to make a video on if bracing anchor is just too strong for its own good, which I do personally think it is. I'd never use it anymore. However, if you do use bracing anchor, it is a very good learning tool, and it's just kind of a good CP in general. If you can clear the content, nothing really matters at that point. If you're not going for score and you're not going for times, then it doesn't really matter if you're slower. Stares at every main tank going up the stairs super slowly in Zelvaka and just looking down the stairs like, come on buddy, hurry up. But no, if you can clear the content and you're using bracing anchor, you don't have to take it off because of what I said here. I just prefer other options, as I personally hate playing a slow character, and playing a tank most of the time you are extremely slow. Also, if you're using bracing anchor and trash, please stop. This video is not about PvP. Bye.